before we get started, yes, I have seen the new Superman movie. No, I don't have all my thoughts together on it because there's a lot to unpack here. And after doing 3 straight weeks of nothing but discussions on the most well-known superhero in the world,
It's the guy from Fortnite!
I wanted to mix things up a little. So before we talk about the Man of Steel, let's shine a light on the other movie starring a team of blue tight-wearing do-gooders protecting the world from evil threats both from this world and beyond. That, of course, being the Fantastic Four. Yeah, shortly after we're seeing Superman return to cinemas, Marvel's first family is getting the same treatment. And I've talked a lot about this film before, but much like my last discussion on the risk Warner Brothers was taking with James Gunn and Superman, I thought it'd be worth it to do the same for the folks down the street at Marvel and figure out how much they're putting behind their favorite cosmic explorers in order to understand just how much of a risk they're taking. Because as we know, just like the Big Blue Boy Scout, the Fantastic Four aren't foreign to the silver screen, having been adapted many times over, though with admittedly a much less successful streak of big screen outings. This does feel like the first go-around where the people behind the cameras really seem to get the characters and universe that they are adapting. But just because they understand the assignment doesn't necessarily mean that they'll actually pull it off. And once again, like I discussed with DC's tentpole blockbuster, Marvel's also putting so much money into this project that once again, it looks like they're gonna need to make $500 million just to break even. And I know this is also the case for something like Avengers Endgame, but you gotta remember, and spoiler alert for how much you've aged since this thing was released, but that film came out 6 years ago now, during the height of Marvel's success. And nowadays, they aren't on the same winning streak. They're also adapting a franchise with, not the best reputation amongst general movie-going audiences. And furthermore, the director they've tasked with steering the ship hasn't made a movie on this scale before. What I'm getting at here is DC isn't the only one taking a gamble this month. So that's what I want to explore today. What are the people making this movie doing differently from the last few go-arounds? How do I think they'll manage to pull it off, if they even do? And what hope does this film have of succeeding? Regardless of its quality, considering the last time the studio released a film on this level, the results at the box office were nothing to write home about. So, let's discuss. So in preparation for this platform to completely crap out of me just like last go around, this time I'm doing this a week in advance. Which is a long-winded and defensive way of me saying that we are just a week away from Fantastic Four First Steps dropping. And that 17 inches Galactus head popcorn bucket has my name on it. Jesus, that was a lot more than I was expecting. But with a handful of days to go, let's take a look and see what it took to get to this point. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the cast, the crew, and everything needed to get this thing from paper to Premiere. Or whatever software they use to edit this thing. Probably Avid. And in my previous videos, I talked about the speculation that led up to the Valentine's Day casting announcement, seeing the crew in all their 1960s glory. And for a long time, people were throwing various names into the ring like Ant-Man director Peyton Reed and Spider-Man director John Watts, only for them to ultimately go with WandaVision showrunner Matt Shakman. But once we knew who the main players were on the field, we then get word that the story was going to be taking place in an alternate 1960s version of the MCU, where the only prominent super figures in the universe were the four themselves until the arrival of the Silver Surfer, bringing with her the world-ending Galactus. And that's pretty much all you need to know going in. And since I'm not much of a story speculator or theory crafter, I'm not going to spend time charting out beat by beat what I think the story might be. Instead, what I do want to focus on is why do I think Marvel is kind of taking a risk here? More so than usually are with these things. Because when you think about it, $250 million sounds like a big price tag.
Which it is.
But this isn't the first time a big studio has dumped a mountain of cash into one of these things being made. In fact, it's kind of commonplace at this point. Looking back on the last 5 movies the studio's released, I know, just 5, right?
It's pathetic.
But looking back on the last 5, that being Thunderbolts, Captain America Brave New World, Deadpool and Wolverine, The Marvels, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, each of these movies spent somewhere in the ballpark of $250 million. Guardians 3 actually being exactly $250 million, and the last 2 this year only being $180 million. Also, good lord in heaven, the Marvels cost $370 million and looks like it only returned about a third of that, so yikes. But when you break it down, it looks like when these things hit, they really do hit. And when they don't, they're more often that break even, with only a couple massive bombs in the last handful. So if we're just going off of recent trends, it does look like Marvel is going out on a limb here with something like this movie. Furthermore, considering the state of the MCU, the hype that used to be followed by every single one of their releases is just not present anymore. Sure, you still have the general diehard fans and comic book influencers talking about this thing, but the reputation Marvel once held amongst the general public has been soured over the last couple of years. And with very little hype for things like Doomsday and Secret Wars coming up, this movie's also kind of Marvel's last shot to make a case for why we should be excited for what they've got in the works. Especially since everything we've been hearing behind the scenes, with things like the Blade movie falling apart, the disjointed TV show releases, and the complete reworking of the formerly titled Kang Dynasty being made into the aforementioned Doomsday, along with a noticeably desperate decision to bring Robert Downey Jr. back in the titular role, it does seem like it's up to this movie to parse through all that noise and restore confidence in this once beloved dynasty of cinematic outings. So like with my last discussion, let's look at the 4 possibilities I can see happening if we're going to the extreme. Those scenarios, of course, being if the film is a good movie and makes a lot of money, is a bad film and still makes a lot of money, is a good film but doesn't make any money, or is a bad film and makes no money.
We have no money.
And since I always say worse is first, in the worst case scenario is a bad movie and makes no money, well then that pretty much cements the theory that the Fantastic Four is impossible to do in live action. Or at the very least, no one in Hollywood at this current time is competent enough to get the job done. Yeah, with my last discussion about Marvel's first family, I noticed a few red flags come up with just the casting announcement alone. Things like Pedro Pascal being announced as Reed Richards had me worried that the reason why that they did this is because they wanted to get as many butts in seats as possible by throwing in a big name actor. And of course they're going to do this regardless, but part of me feared that they might be doing this because the script wasn't all there and they knew that without a star-studded cast, they weren't going to have a hit on their hands. And with the previous 3 iterations to get this team right, each one has run into a different set of issues that resulted in it completely falling apart. The first one being that they didn't trust the project and had no intention of releasing it. Though despite this, because of the enthusiasm of the crew, they did manage to put together something that I actually find quite charming, in a low-budget B-movie kind of way. Of course, then you had the Tim Story ones, which was the first time these productions were meant to see the light of day, but since there wasn't really quite a formula of how to make these things yet, it pretty much just felt like a sitcom of a bunch of superhero characters, where they were just kind of screwing around and getting on each other's nerves until in the end, the evil businessman would turn to metal and they beat him by lighting him on fire. Not exactly the best depiction of how these characters' stories usually go in the comics, but at least it sold well. This of course allowed it to be the only Fantastic Four film to get a sequel, which didn't do much to fix any of the problems. We'd also end up getting a picture-perfect accurate Silver Surfer and a completely unrecognizable Galactus Cloud. That of course did not do this so many favors, especially considering the fact that the story itself was just kind of lackluster and dull. And then of course you have Josh Trank's attempt at the characters, which was pretty much just completely ripped away from him halfway through production. Possibly as a result of how he was behaving on set, or due to other circumstances we just don't know about. Honestly, the nightmare of production on this makes it kind of impossible to know what went wrong. The shorter list in this regard would be what went right. But notice none of these problems have ever been really a result of the Fantastic Four as a concept. The story of 4 space explorers being permanently altered and then finding a way to become something of an icon for people out in the world, regardless of their differences, isn't exactly bad material. I personally think Stan Lee and Jack Kirby are cooking with most of their concepts, if not always succeeding in the execution. But it only seems like the problem falls into the lack of confidence in getting the material adapted in the first place. And considering the state Marvel's in, I do worry that maybe they're in a similar mindset of being extremely hesitant and trying to micromanage everything. I mean, you'll note that they've been cutting scenes and storylines out of this thing, as well as conducting significant reshoots with the main actors. Which, when it comes to reshoots, 1 time, that makes sense, that's standard for how these things go. 2, it's okay, don't get too worried. 3, maybe there are some issues going on behind the scenes. And 4, yeah, get ready for some disappointment. It's also kind of concerning that some of these reshoots are being done mere weeks before the big release. But the folks over at Marvel have assured us that this is just standard movie making practice, so I guess it's not quite a 5-alarm fire, but I mean, what do you expect them to say? Oh no, everything's falling apart, please just see the movie because we need your money? I mean, I guess I would appreciate the honesty. But these are just some reasons why there might be some call for concern, especially when you're adapting something as crazy as the coming of Galactus. I mean, this is clearly not a story that we're comfortable with doing wholesale, and so scale it back to the most essential elements in the previous attempt. No Watcher, no Greater Marvel Universe, no Ultimate Nullifier, just 4 knuckleheads in the woods and a chrome naked guy without a dick. And if this film doesn't end up doing well, then we've got a lot of concern when it comes to the bigger Avengers movies on the horizon. After all, the story that they're looking to adapt is heavily focused around the Fantastic Four, that being Doomsday and Secret Wars. Doomsday is more up in the air as to what it's going to be about. It seems like it's going to be more of an adaptation of Time Runs Out, which is just a Jonathan Hickman story that leads into Avengers Secret Wars, having to do with incursions and worlds colliding. We heard a little about it with the Illuminati in the last Doctor Strange film, which also the Illuminati were a big part of Time Runs Out. Though they took on a very different form and weren't all dead. But Secret Wars is practically a Fantastic Four comic in disguise, following all these different factions of Marvel characters, but centering around the 4 as being the ones who are going to stop Doctor Doom. Spoilers for the comic. Mainly Reed Richards finally combating Doctor Doom and making him admit once and for all that between the 2 of them, Reed is the better man. I also just love how this part plays out. Doom finally admits that Reed could have solved the problem better than he could have. And then when the Molecule Man just like, okay, we agree, Doom just looks at him and goes, no wait! Hilarious. Back to the thing. But if this film isn't very good, well then, it's kinda gonna be a big problem when it comes to having that catharsis. Especially with the fact that Doom and Reed aren't gonna have a lot of on-screen time together before that big confrontation. At best, we'll have one full movie in Doomsday to set up the relationship, and Secret Wars will build to a big payoff. Meanwhile, this Fantastic Four movie, all reports are saying that you shouldn't expect Doctor Doom to play a major role. At best, I predict there to be a post-credit scene with Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor Doom cloaked in shadows. And I don't think they're going to be substituting the character of Reed with anyone else because, quite frankly, who could do it? The Marvel Universe is kind of scattered to the winds. No one really knows who's available. At best, we have the Thunderbolts pretending to be the Avengers, but even then, none of them have a deep connection with Doctor Doom, nor should they. Maybe they'll do something where they lure Chris Evans back with a dump truck of money and make him play Captain America one last time to fight Iron Man, which might just be the laziest story they could possibly tell. A palette swap remake of Civil War, but on Battleworld. Geez, save some imagination for the rest of us. This idea sucks so much that I don't want to even think of a world where they do it. And which is why they really got to get the character of Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four as a whole right. And if it bombs, the studio heads are definitely not going to be interested in putting more time into these characters, resulting in another Eternal situation where these characters are just left in the winds. Watcher knows what's going to happen to them next. Did Icarus truly die? Will the Celestials come back? Is Harry Styles the anchor being of this universe?
I don't know.
And because the movie didn't do well both critically and commercially, then we're probably never checking back up on this corner of the Marvel Universe. But hold on, what if the Fantastic Four does end up doing well? I mean, this has been a pretty good summer for blockbuster movies after all. Lord knows the second I dropped that "Is DC Gambling with Superman" video, the movie had already blown the competition out of the water as opening night, so excellent timing that was on my part.
Good job.
And with Marvel putting so much damn money into this marketing campaign, again, I have to imagine people are gonna see it, if for nothing else than that overpriced Galactus head I'm also gonna buy. I mean, it's either that or popcorn and soda, practically the same price at this point. But if it does well, but isn't a very good film, that's pretty much it for Marvel going forward. Yeah, we'll have some things like the Thunderbolts to look forward to, or maybe some X-Men stories, but those big Avengers films they're working on that they had to push back because they need more time in the oven? Yeah, not looking good for them. It also might be a case of a fooled me once, shame on you, fooled me twice, shame on me kind of situation, where fans are going to get just tired of the wishy-washy, are they going to be good or are they going to disappoint, oscillating quality in the movies. Meaning that any goodwill that Thunderbolts had acquired, yeah, that's just thrown to the wayside. But let's stop being negative, alright? Maybe this thing will be good. I actually have some high hopes for it. Because yeah, while I'm not exactly thrilled that Matt Shakman hasn't done a film on this scale before, he has worked well with Marvel in the past. WandaVision is probably the second best series this franchise has produced since starting up Disney+. I still think their best show is Loki, but that's neither here nor there. And Matt Shakman has done some pretty cool things with shows like Monarch, and my favorite project he's a part of, Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Though I don't imagine the team dynamics there will be mirrored one-to-one with Marvel's first family. They also just seem to be swinging for the fences with this one, putting the Fantastic Four in a world designed for them, completely separate from the rest of the goings-ons of the MCU, until inevitably the two worlds clash, either because something happens that results in them having to flee their world, or just general incursions, who knows. And so long as this film delivers on the characters and crew, then this does bode well for future installments. I do wish we would have more time to get to know this crew, because as it stands, it does feel like we're rushing straight into Doomsday and Secret Wars, even with the delays. And I think in order to do those moments from the comics justice, you really need to develop that long-standing relationship between Doom and Reed. By the way, I don't know why, it just occurred to me. Dr. Doom is called Doctor despite I don't think he even got his PhD, considering the fact he got his face blown off in his senior year.
You were expelled before you got your degree.
Sure, he does have several doctorates from universities within his own country, but that's kind of a Obama giving Obama a medal situation, so I don't think it really counts. Sure, he's a genius and all, but for whatever reason, if he did flunk some professor's class, I'm pretty sure the dean would call him up and say, hey, give this guy a passing grade or else he's gonna pull funding to our university. He'll drop a bomb on us. But on the other hand, you have Reed over here who did make it all the way through to graduation, so technically shouldn't it be called Dr. Fantastic instead of Mr. Fantastic? I don't know, maybe he is just really the better man. The point is, we're not getting that time to see these characters develop any sort of rapport with each other before being thrusted into this multiversal Avengers epic. And I know you could make the argument that the same thing happened with Thanos, only getting one movie to get into his head and see what makes him tick. But the difference between Doctor Doom and Thanos is that with the Mad Titan, he had been built up since the first Avengers movie all the way back in 2012. And from there you got snippets and scenes of his character, as well as others reacting in fear when his name is invoked. The first two Guardians movies do a lot of the heavy lifting in building up this guy's reputation, so that when he inevitably takes center stage, audiences know that we have a threat on our hands. And also even there was kind of something lacking in terms of having a real rivalry between him and another character. In the comics, it's usually Adam Warlock, but since he wasn't introduced till Guardians Volume 3, they sort of substituted him with Iron Man, but there wasn't much depth to that relationship other than a passing acknowledgement of the other's achievements. But at least he existed before this film, and occupied something of a space in Tony's head, even if he didn't directly know him by name. Meanwhile, up until this point, the name Victor Von Doom has never left the lips of a single person. And no matter what they do from now until the movie is released in I think December of 2026, that's just not going to give this guy the same level of build-up. But I don't want to say anymore because I think in order to do a character like Victor Von Doom justice, you gotta give him his own discussion. Also, we're mainly here to discuss his rivals, the Fantastic Four. And in that regard, in terms of what a good and financially successful film will mean for the franchise, well, unlike with DC's latest offerings, the directions Marvel can go moving forward are much more limited. Because with DC, the sky's really the limit. Superman was an introduction to a universe. Meanwhile, the Fantastic Four, while just playing around in a brand new corner of the MCU, it's not a section of it I expect to be around very long. And they're likely going to end up folded into the main continuity, which could result in a massive universe-wide reboot. So the only thing that the quality of the film will affect is, in my opinion, how excited people will be to see these characters again. I don't think elements and plot lines from one story are really going to carry over from one movie to another, at least not in a direct sense. If this film does result in them ending up as interdimensional refugees, then yeah, that's probably going to be the thing that kickstarts the Secret Wars storyline, and there's a good to fair chance that the Doctor Doom we'll be seeing in that universe comes from the same dimension as the one these guys hail from. There's also the Franklin Richards in the room, who, if you didn't know in the comics, is exceedingly powerful, but I don't think he's going to be much more than just a baby in this one. So my bet is we're just going to be kicking the can down the road as long as possible before dealing with this godlike toddler. But yeah, the only thing I think will happen if this movie's a good film, and of course makes money, is that, well, we'll get a good story. And hopefully more to come from this team. I think they have all the elements to tell a great Fantastic Four tale. My only problem is that the multiverse that this is a part of is kind of a disjointed mess. And knowing what's on the horizon, I'm just not as excited for the future of this franchise as I am for someone like the Man of Tomorrow. But I do still hope it's good and predict that it's going to do fairly well. This has been a solid summer for big blockbuster movies. I don't see why the Fantastic Four would be any different, regardless of both the universe that it's attached to and the numerous failed attempts of making this team a household name. Thunderbolt's failure at the box office can mainly be attributed to the fact that the film that came before did not inspire confidence in what was to come, along with the studio not really knowing how to market the thing, paired alongside with the fact that no one in the team was anyone's favorite character. Except maybe Bucky, but even still, that's not a huge section of the fan base. Meanwhile, this film has received a heavy marketing push, and has done a lot to distinguish itself from the previous incarnations, as well as trying its hardest to assure audiences that this go around, they're gonna get it right. And you know what? I kinda believe them. If for no other reason than me just wanting to see these characters done justice. After all, I've had a soft spot for the Fantastic Four since I first saw those movies all the way back in 2005, where despite not being the best introduction, kickstarted an interest that resulted in me finding much better tales that really did astonish. And I hope that others get a chance to see those too, but I think that's only going to be possible if they nail this team's introduction. And if they don't make any money, Marvel might pull in Eternals and try its hardest to sideline these guys. Though the Fantastic Four occupy a much grander spot in the Marvel universe, so this is less likely, but you never know with these studio heads. Obviously, in order to get the best outcome, this movie needs to both be a good film and perform well in theaters. And those are the ways I think I can see things playing out. And I will be continuing to hold out hope that this film will revitalize interest in Marvel's first family up until the moment it is released. And hey, worst case scenario, I'm pretty confident that it can't be any worse than what's come before.